Hi everyone, it's Christopher, Mono County Library Director and co-host of the Oxygen Starved podcast. And for this week's Book Talk Friday, I've chosen two books that zero in on specific events in the ongoing history of the women's movement. One old and one current, because there is still work to be done globally to create true equity in terms of representation and leadership and pay. Now, We Shall Not Be Moved by Joan Dash came out about 25 years ago, and it's gone on to become a classic work aimed at middle school readers examining the women's factory strike of 1909. Now, early in the last century, a lot of manufacturing happened in cities, and one important industry in downtown New York was the garment making industry. If you visit the trendy and expensive sections of Manhattan's Lower East Side today, you're hard-pressed to understand that just 100 years ago, it was a neighborhood of factories and sweatshops, producing shirts and dresses and pants in often unsafe, oppressive conditions. Most of these workers were underpaid women, usually immigrants, and mostly teenagers. They were forbidden from talking to each other on their long shifts, and if they arrived so much as 5 minutes late, they could lose half of their day's pay. And they paid to do that work. They rented lockers for their hats and coats, they rented the sewing machines that they worked at, and they paid for the needles and thread themselves. In turn, they were paid mostly on a piecework basis, and during times that were really busy, they were required to work up to 80 hours a week. And during the slow periods, they still had to show up, even if there was no work and thus no money to be made. Now, there were strikes against these conditions here and there, but things came to a head when Clara Lemlich, a young Ukrainian immigrant, led the International Ladies Garment Union Local 25 to strike in November of 1909. 15,000 garment workers walked off the job the very next day, crippling the industry. Now, the bosses and owners fought back with thug-like tactics, but the workers were given attention and support from an unlikely source: many well-to-do society women of the day, the so-called Mink Brigade. These were women who were willing to be arrested for picketing alongside the garment workers, which helped spotlight the issues to the broader public. Now, the strike itself lasted well into the next year, and it helped gain better wages and hours and working conditions. It also inspired the proposal for the first International Women's Day, which is still recognized globally each year on March 8th. One coda to the story: despite the success of the strike, the working conditions were still dangerous, and barely 1 year later, one of the sweatshops in question, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, famously caught fire with locked fire doors, killing well over 146 workers. Again, most of them young women, many of whom tragically jumped their deaths to escape the flames. You can still visit that building today near Washington Square. It's landmarked and it's part of the NYU campus. Now, my pick for the new this week is The Daughters of Kobani, a story of rebellion, courage, and justice by Gail Zemek Lemon. It is a more current story of women banding together not just to improve their lives, but to save them against the onslaught of ISIS. Lemon has written extensively from Afghanistan and often told stories that reflected the irony that the upheaval of war can create opportunity for women in oppressed societies. Here, she's focusing on the civil war and the ISIS movement in northeast Syria, where a unique group of women fighters emerged called the Kurdish Women's Protection Units. They led women and men in the fight in direct frontline leadership roles and were so committed to combating ISIS that if they were about to be captured, they would often commit suicide instead. They promoted and demonstrated full equality and had earned the full respect and cooperation of the other all-male protection unit counterparts, and they were backed with the same American support. The ambition of these women was not just to defeat ISIS, though. It was to inspire the region's society that it should rise out of this war to fully embrace women's liberation. They were fighting to prove a point for real societal change. And in this sense, they presented themselves as the political antithesis to ISIS, whose ideology, of course, sees women as property, not as equals. Closing out the prologue, Lemon, who herself has Kurdish roots, describes coming back from her first visit to the front lines with this group in 2017. On the drive out of Raqqa that August night, our team silent in our minivan from a mixture of heat and fatigue and relief, I worked to stretch my imagination around what we had seen. Never had I encountered women more confident leading people, more comfortable with power, and less apologetic about running things. Whatever ambivalence I felt at the outset, this story mattered. Its impact would be felt well beyond one conflict, even a war with as much consequence as the Syrian civil war. The story had found me, and I knew by then when that happens, when a story grabs you and digs into your imagination and presents you with questions you simply cannot answer, you either embrace the inevitable and get to work reporting, or store it away in your mind and know it will find you and haunt you and gnaw at you regardless. I chose to get to work, and the work she chose to get to resulted in The Daughters of Kobani. This book, which came out to great reviews about a year ago. It's by Gail Lemon, and our pick for the old this week is We Shall Not Be Moved by Joan Dash. Came out about 25 years ago, but it's gone on to become a classic. Both important works about the women's movement globally. Come in and find these at Mono County Libraries, or another great read to inspire you. In the meantime, stay safe and happy reading.